This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Japan plays a key role on the global stage. It's the world's fourth largest economy, with major manufacturing industries for things like electronics and cars. It's the only non-Euro-Atlantic member of the G7, a key member of the US alliance in the Asia-Pacific region, and a major non-NATO ally. Over the last few years, Japan's close relations with the West, particularly the US, have bloomed in a number of ways, but there have also been signs of strain and points of divergence, which could be set to deepen even further as Trump returns. So in this video, we're going to explain why Japan's relationship with the United States has fallen into a particularly difficult spot, why it may well get worse, and what it means for the future. Could you rank every single politician in the world? Hear our thoughts and argue with us on our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. We're going to start by making it clear that Japan's foreign policy has not and does not always align with the US. A good demonstration of this can be seen in Japan's response to Hamas's October the 7th attack on Israel and Israel's subsequent war in Gaza, a response described by some as cautious. Japan's immediate response condemned Hamas's actions, but did not use the word terrorism or endorse the idea of an Israeli right to self-defense. And while these did soon become features of the Japanese response, it took longer to get there than its G7 allies. Furthermore, Japan's Prime Minister was the only G7 leader not to sign a joint statement later in October 2023 that expressed support for Israel's right to defend itself, a decision justified by the Japanese government, which said the 6 member nations were victims of citizen kidnapping and casualties, unlike Japan. News reports from the time highlights the gap between the Japanese and US-led positions. Reuters wrote that Japan was taking a cautious approach and was resisting pressure to fall in line with the pro-Israel stance of the US, while Japan's Asahi Shimbun wrote that Japan appears isolated within the G7, of which it was the chair at the time. Japan also diverged from the US during several related votes at the United Nations too. It voted in favour of a UN Security Council draft resolution on the 18th of October 2023 that called for humanitarian pauses in Gaza, but was vetoed by the US. Then, in April 2024, Japan supported the move to grant full UN membership to Palestine, which again was vetoed in the Security Council by the US. Now, we're not trying to say that any of this necessarily represents Japan and the US falling out over Gaza, but the point we're making is that on foreign policy and in other areas, Japan is not always aligned with the US, as highlighted by recent crises. The strongest example of the two countries actually butting heads is the ongoing saga over US steel. For some brief context, US Steel is unsurprisingly an American steelmaking company, which was on the cusp of being acquired by Japanese firm Nippon Steel for nearly $15 billion, before US President Joe Biden followed through on a promise to keep US Steel domestically owned and blocked the takeover bid in early January, citing national security concerns. Now, this sparked anger from both US and Nippon Steel, who have filed lawsuits challenging Biden's blocking order. But the order was also met with an unhappy response from the Japanese government. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba warned that Biden's decision raised concerns over future Japanese investment in the US, and strongly called on the US government to take steps to dispel these concerns, adding that they need to be able to explain clearly why there is national security concern, or else further discussions on the matter will not work. The national security point seems to be a particularly sore one, given Japan's position as a US ally. The chair of Japan's largest business lobby said this week that the US is, quote, a country that has been advocating to overcome economic security challenges through friendshoring or through cooperation with so-called like-minded countries. We're struggling to understand how the recent decision can be consistent with this kind of policy. What hasn't helped the rift are the explosive comments from the CEO of Cleveland Cliffs, an American steelmaker eager to buy up US Steel, who said this week that, quote, Japan is evil. He accused Japan of teaching China how to dump steel, saying China is evil, China is horrible, but Japan is worse, Japan is a lot worse. So could Trump returning to office make things better or worse? Now, in his first term, Trump actually had a very good relationship with then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was the first foreign leader to meet with Trump after his election as US President in 2016. But things are not looking so good for Ishiba. After last year's US election, Ishiba initially sought an in-person meeting with President-elect Trump in the US in November, on Ishiba's way back from a trip to South America. But this was declined by Trump's team, citing rules on foreign meetings before taking office. But it wouldn't have gone unnoticed in Japan that the president-elect was happy to meet with other leaders like Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Volodymyr Zelensky, Giorgia Meloni, and Javier Milei. Ishiba now says he hopes to meet Trump as early as possible and at an appropriate time, with him looking at a possible visit to the US before mid-February. For Japan, there are three main concerns with Trump that we can identify. The first is that Trump may well again demand that Japan pay a huge amount more money for the US military presence in the country, a demand that could further strain the alliance, especially considering Ishiba's personal view that the US-Japan alliance is already an unequal one in the US's favour. Second is Trump's tariff-heavy approach to trade. So far, Trump has talked of imposing tariffs, not just on China, but on basically everyone, including allies like Japan, which, with its high trade surplus with the US, could draw Trump's particular attention. In his first term, Trump slapped tariffs on Japanese steel and aluminium, and now Japan's major automobile manufacturers think they might be next. And third, there were reportedly jitters in Japan that Trump could seek a so-called grand bargain with China, behind the backs of Japan and others. As Politico writes, Japanese policymakers have vivid memories of how Trump sidelined Tokyo in his efforts to engage with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in 2018. All these concerns could, at least in part, be contributing to an apparent warming of relations between Japan and China, as the former could be reviving its so-called dual hedging strategy. Ishiba has publicly expressed his goal of improving the Japan-China relationship, and he held his first bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping the same month that Trump rejected a meeting, and senior officials from Japan's and China's ruling parties held their first official dialogue in 6 years this week. Ultimately, we're not trying to portend a dramatic collapse in the US-Japan alliance, but it's clear that the relationship faces several significant points of tension going forward, and that Japan is having to consider a delicate approach to what could be a turbulent 4-year Trump term. There's a lot of difficult decisions necessary here, and making huge decisions, especially quickly, is difficult, even for world leaders. The good thing is that brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data, programming, and AI. Their interactive classes help build your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not memorizing. So while you're building real knowledge on specific topics, you'll also be becoming a better thinker. For instance, their Predicting with Probability course can help you better understand and assess the world around you. You can learn to wrangle massive datasets, compare distributions, and master fundamental concepts like Bayes' theorem. That might sound a little technical, but with their active learning, you learn this by answering questions like which airline is least likely to have a delay due to weather, and how much more unruly airline passengers have gotten since the pandemic. Data skills are absolutely necessary for navigating the modern world, and Brilliant is the best way to get them. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, or click the link in the description. And by doing so, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.